Yes, Councillor Neal.
Yes, I'd like to waive bylaw 1 in order to.
Okay, to add a delegation? Okay.
Great.
So so you can present that, we'll take any additional delegations now.
I will indeed. Moved by myself and Councillor Kiley. I hereby move a waiver of bylaw 1 in order to allow Andrew McCann to come in delegation to speak to motion number 2, moved by Councillors Doherty and Hutchison.
Okay. We'll call the vote, please. And that carries. Are there any other delegations to add? Okay, thank you. So at this point, we'll invite Mr. McCann to come and speak to Council with respect to new motion number 2 with respect to the open budget proposal.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Great. All right. So took off my shirt, but it's not that kind of show. I'll talk about the shirt in a second. I'm here representing Open Kingston, which I think all the councillors are familiar with. The past 2 elections have set up a website which has sought to make our electoral process more accessible and transparent for Kingston, and citizens linking all the candidates' websites and social media, and then asking pertinent questions and conveniently displaying answers on tough issues, and then going to more detailed answers for people. What we're here to talk about tonight, obviously, is Councillor Doherty and Hutchison's motion about open budgeting, which very much touches on similar themes of transparency, increased engagement, consultation, and democracy. And we are fully, myself and others involved in Open Kingston and other democratic movements, I think, are very much in support of moves in this direction. The reason I want to speak tonight, however, is just to make a quick and important differentiation between the proposal, the motion, which has important things about public media, social media, consultation, and citizen suggestions in it, and differentiating that with a concept which is mentioned in one line called participatory budgeting. And that's what this T-shirt is about. So participatory budgeting is a form of open democracy, but it's something quite different, where at the end, and deeper in ways, because at the end of the day, citizens are proposing projects based on a fixed budget. This can happen in many different ways. City staff usually vet them in some way about viability. And then there's a public education process, which involves a lot of community volunteerism and promotion, and different groups promote their projects. And then there's actually a vote. And often you get thousands and thousands of people voting in these processes. And then the winning projects get the money and do the thing. Arts projects, education projects, events, whatever it is. So that's participatory budgeting in a nutshell, and you can kind of see it really quickly on the T-shirt. Light bulb for idea, project, vote, the thing happens. So that, as you can imagine, is very different from the very laudable open budgeting measures that are being talked about, which we fully support. Participatory budgeting is something that is happening all around the world right now. This is a very recent report from December with talking about 11,000 different participatory budgeting projects around the world. You can see by these numbers that Canada is certainly far behind Europe and Asia and Latin America, where these processes originated. So we have some catching up to do. And to do that catching up is going to take time, because it's not something that generally works very well. The studies show when it's top down. We need to build grassroots engagement and interest in this form of participatory democracy. And that's something that myself and Councillor Neal have been working on for a while. We went together to a conference at Harvard a few years ago in 2016, an international conference where we met dozens and hundreds of people, including Councillor Shelley Carroll, who's on the Participatory Budgeting Project's international board, for advisory internationally for participatory budgeting. She's just down the 401. She's done in her district in Toronto 6 consecutive participatory budgeting projects with a $500,000 budget that she's allocated for projects in her community with increasing amounts of success. It's exciting. It's something that engages community members, especially youth. You often get high school students involved. It's a way to reignite passion in democracy, which, as we all know, there's decreasing voter turnout. There's, for many reasons, there's been a declining amount of participation in our electoral democratic processes. So participatory budgeting is a way to deepen our democracies and build, especially involving youth. So it also builds people's capacity to participate in tough policy processes, to make the tough decisions that governments make about budget priorities. But again, that takes a lot of not only city engagement, education of staff and councils in municipalities, or it also happens at provincial levels and nation state levels. Portugal did a national scale participatory budgeting. But it also takes a lot of volunteerism. So that's something we need to build over time in the community. And I'm not sure, what the interface between this motion about open budgeting, which are things that staff can act on quickly, and the possibility for participatory budgeting, which is mentioned once in the proposal, may be. But I can promise that, Jim, myself, and others are working, and we're thinking more like 1 to 3 years, working towards
30 seconds.
Thank you. A robust participatory budgeting process in Kingston, perhaps tapping into community benefit funds. That's one idea. That's what they're doing in Toronto. And our immediate idea is to get Shelley and her staff member, Mustafa, who works explicitly on participatory budgeting because they do one cycle every year, and he really works on it year-round, Mustafa, to get them to come to Kingston to do an education day sometime this spring where, we'd have a daytime event for staff and council perhaps, and an evening event for the public. So that's where we're at with participatory budgeting.
That's great. Thank you very much. Are there any questions? Councillor Cotton.
Thank you, Mayor Patterson. And through you, in the Toronto example, how many folks are city staff versus the volunteers that we would need that you mentioned versus political staffers? What's kind of the composition of the committees that run the exercise?
Yeah, we'd have to get Shelley to unpack the details. Councillor Kiley, I haven't, been part of the Toronto processes. I do know that the city of Cambridge, which is, where Harvard is in Massachusetts, where the conference that we went to is hosted, is a Kingston-sized municipality, and they had a pretty even mix of staff hours and volunteer hours in terms of running the public events where people made proposals. But ultimately, you need staff expertise to vet the projects, right? Like, how much is this going to cost in our city? What are the implications to the land use or whatever the kind of art installation or other kind of project may be? So there needs to be an interplay between community, but that in itself is a democratic exercise where citizens and citizens groups are working with staff and council. So it's a very, like I said, it very much deepens democracy, but it's not something you can do on a weekend. It happens over time and has a lot of people involved.
Thank you.
Deputy Mayor Chappelle.
Thank you, and through your worship. What I'm hearing you say is a lot about spending new dollars or an allotment of $500,000 and getting the community to choose how you want to spend it. Is there any opportunity to have people participate that say, well, I want you to reduce spending on these areas, and I want you to cut my taxes, and I want you to fix the roads, and I want you to do other things rather than spend money?
Yeah. It's not really, participatory budgeting is not really about spending less money. It's about taking a small piece of money. Again, it could be community benefit funds is one thing that's been happening in Toronto. Taking a small piece of money and actually using that to gain huge benefits in terms of citizen engagement, in terms of citizen education and capacity building around democracy, engaging our youth so that they're interested in the future of democracy. So I think the dividends in terms of the benefits of having people involved, not just because they're learning and engaging and because there's money on the line, so that's part of what makes them passionate and engaged, because there's real stakes and they get to vote directly, but also because they have to make those tough decisions. They realize the chair that you're sitting in, that there's not endless amounts of money for every project, that only a few can be chosen. So in a way, they do learn those things, even if it's not a cost-cutting oriented project.
Councillor Holland.
Thank you, Your Worship. So you spoke about the potential involvement of younger demographics, high school students, for example. Have you seen studies, like I do know that other municipalities have had the age for participating can be whatever, it can be low.
Yeah.
And have there been studies longer term that have demonstrated higher voter turnouts or more engagement with certain demographics?
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously very difficult to isolate the voter turnout variable vis-a-vis the experience with participatory budgeting, but certainly there are many examples, not only of processes where, because each city, each province, each nation state that does it designs their own process, right? So there are certainly examples where the voting age for the participatory budgeting process is lower, is 16 or 14 years old, which enhances that youth engagement. I haven't seen anything that is claiming that that translated directly into X voter turnout increase or decrease, because that would be a very difficult, variable. But that research may exist. I'm not an academic expert in the field. There is certainly a mountain of literature, academic literature, researching, these thousands of processes around the world. Yeah.
Councillor Stroud.
Thank you. So if I understand it correctly, and to use my family as an example. So say we were taking a family vacation, and right now my wife and I talk about where we're going to go and how much we're going to spend, and we might have a budget in mind of how much we can spend. So this would be like saying to the kids, we have 3 kids, we have $1,000 to spend on this vacation, and we're going to Florida, so you've got Legoland and all these places you might want to go, and this is what they call. So giving it to them, saying, if you were the one in charge, what would you choose to do with that money? Is that, and then they're more into the planning of the vacation than they would otherwise be, because you've given them some control over those decisions. Is that basically how it works?
It's probably not the metaphor I'd choose, but yes, in a sense it is. And I think most importantly about that, as you pointed out, Councillor Stroud, you can set the contours of the process. For example, if and when the city was ready to embark upon this in partnership with community organizations, they could say, oh, we're going to do X amount of money over this time frame, and it's going to be targeted at climate change related projects, education, art, and other kinds of interventions. So you can definitely shape the type of projects that are called for. You can also say only projects from community organizations, nothing from individuals, or you can encourage individuals. So there are many design questions, and there's a lot of comparison to make. And bringing Councillor Shelley Carroll from Toronto, who's been a councillor for many, many terms, to Kingston to talk about that, because she has an international perspective on the kinds of processes, I think will be a good step, hopefully this spring.
And so from your presentation, I understand. So the motion that we're considering tonight is about an open budget process as described in the motion. And is it, you said your support, so it's like a stepping stone and in the future to think about adding participatory budgeting?
It's an awesome motion that gets into some really concrete, immediately possible measures. There is one sentence, whereas cities such as Toronto, Ottawa, Hamilton, and Guelph have embraced participatory budgeting. It's that sentence which brings me here this evening, because I just wanted to make a differentiation between the kinds of exciting open budgeting measures being proposed and participatory budgeting, which is a distinct and more intensive process.
Councillor Neal.
Thank you. And I appreciate we were able to, I can always say I went to Harvard for a weekend. But it was a really, really interesting conference. And could you comment on participatory democracy? Does it mean a greater tax burden, or is it sharing the allocation of an existing budget?
There's no need to add any tax burden to open the door to more participation to one's citizens. It's why the family metaphor is nice but not quite right, because ultimately citizens aren't the children of the family. They are the democratic family. They're the fellow adults. And so what it is a moment where we open that process up, and the hard decisions you all face weekly and daily as councillors to help people appreciate the challenge that represents in terms of prioritization. So no, there's no need for any increases in taxes to share that responsibility through this process.
And my final question, I know that from what I understand from participatory democracy, it leads to a kind of collaborative approach, because at first blush, this may seem like, Councillor Stroud has something in his district and I have something in my district. That sounds like a competition. But in fact, is there an opportunity to work collaboratively?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really key question, and there's a lot of research and literature on the ways that competition and collaboration coincide and intermingle in participatory budgeting processes, especially as a community, if there are multiple cycles and the community realizes, wow, okay, this time, similar to what council faces, this time it's going to be this organization or this area's project, and next time there will be consideration given to other areas and other projects, which is something that you as district representatives face all the time. The other thing I wanted to say in reference to this is a really interesting conversation I had with Councillor Hutchison, who spoke about seeking excellence in our democracies, and I think that's a really key concept here, because we're building capacity and excellence by engaging citizens in this process, right? Like it's like I said, it's not a one-off. You show up, you give your opinion, you vote. You have to pitch the proposals. People often have multiple events where they're winnowed down. The process gets designed, but the point is that people appreciate the depths of the municipal decision-making process when they participate. And not everybody, but it can literally be like thousands of citizens. So it's pretty exciting, especially when you get the high school students involved.
Thank you, much appreciated.
Okay, seeing no other questions, thank you very much.
Thank you all very much.
Okay, number 2, moved by Councillor Doherty, seconded by Councillor Hutchison. Whereas the City of Kingston's guiding principles in decision-making, policy development, and resource allocation includes fiscal responsibility and accountability to create efficiencies and synergies, balance tax and non-tax revenue, and manage debt effectively. And whereas successive councils have supported open and transparent government, and whereas public interest is best served by a process that embraces transparency, accountability, and openness, and whereas these guiding principles should ensure better public engagement to collect diverse perspectives and to act fairly, sustainably, responsibly, and equitably on behalf of our citizens, and whereas members in our community have asked for opportunities to engage in the budget planning process, and whereas cities such as Toronto, Ottawa, Hamilton, and Guelph have embraced participatory budgeting, therefore be resolved that staff research and recommend an open budget process that can be implemented in the budget process for the 2021 budget, which takes place in November 2020. And that the recommended processes include public meetings, web and social media postings to inform citizens about municipal financial sources, choices and services, and where possible in an interactive format, and a consultation process to gather suggestions on how to use municipal budget to further improve services and performance, and feedback to citizens regarding suggestions received and the rationale for decisions made. Councillor Doherty, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mayor Patterson. Cities in Ontario and across Canada are opening the budget process to the public. It is recognized that open budgets are more transparent, more accountable, and they lead to better decisions. Residents will have opportunities to engage in the process, to offer valuable input, and understand the complexities involved in setting city budgets. When we open our budget process, we will create more understanding, and that matters. I spoke with staff, and there are no concerns at all. Participatory budget is mentioned in the motion because cities such as Hamilton have embraced that process as a model. The motion asks staff to research and recommend an open budget process. Everyone understands the importance and the value of engaging our residents. So I hope my fellow councillors will support this motion and embrace public involvement.
Okay, thank you. Is there anybody else who wishes to speak? Councillor Hutchison?
I just want to add that, and probably councillors recognize this, that we're already following these processes in part when we do the budget, but in particular in planning, where people put their comments in and staff reply with answers to the questions. And that's what I see as being useful. The difficult part will be that choices have to be made. Staff often are telling us we can do X, Y, and Z, but B and C we can't do right now. They don't put it that bluntly, but that's what they're basically saying. And hopefully this will be publicly educational. You know, this is where your tax dollars are going. This is how the process works. This is why council has difficulty, staff has difficulty with making choices. And so I think the more we engage the public about that, the better educated public we have, then it enriches the governance process. And so that's why when asked by the mover, Councillor Doherty, I was more than willing to do this, and we made some, cleaned some stuff up, and this is the result, and I hope the council will look to the future and support this. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Holland.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm just question for staff regarding the whereas clause that references the participatory budgeting. I'm just curious if, with the motion as is, if staff would be conducting research on participatory budgeting practices in other jurisdictions.
CEO Hurdle.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor. So we can definitely collect information. I think we would want to do that. Obviously, for this coming year, we would focus on the content of this motion, which is really to create a more open process for the budget. But we would report back information on participatory budget to council as well.
Deputy Mayor Chappelle.
Thank you, through your chair. I was wondering if it would be open to suggestion to the mover and seconder to actually remove that clause that references participatory budgeting in the whereas cities of Toronto, Ottawa, Hamilton, Guelph have embraced participatory budgeting, only because I don't want it to be confusing to the public that what we'll be doing is engaging and demonstrating their support, but that's a completely different type of budgetary process as we learned from our presentation tonight.
So you can ask the question. Councillor Doherty.
Can I ask a question before I answer this? To staff.
Just, I don't know how that would work. I think it's better if you just respond to the question that's been asked by the councillor as best you can, and then it is your motion, so you will have the right to speak last at some point before we take the vote.
Okay, thank you. So that clause, I understand Councillor Chappelle's concern and the confusion between open budget and participatory budgeting as the presenter spoke to earlier. Now, this clause only states that those particular cities have embraced, well, not all of them participatory budgeting, but they have embraced in open budget as well as participatory budgeting. So if it does cause any confusion, I'm happy to delete that, but it is a fact, and I assume that staff would be researching it anyhow, because they'll come across that when they research other cities that have that process. So I'm open, it depends on, I'd like to call on the seconder of the motion as well.
I think that there's open budget, and then as a subset, there's participatory budget. So there's no real contradiction. They overlap. It's like a Venn diagram.
Okay.
And there's no reason to take that clause out.
So Deputy Mayor Chappelle, so you've asked the question to the mover. Seconder, I think I'm going to take from that the answer is no. Okay. Anybody else that wishes to speak? Councillor Shrub.
Thank you. So for further context, it's not in the motion, but just for you guys and for those following at home, we did make open government a strategic priority in the last term of council. It was one of the 6 strategic priorities. And in my mind, this motion speaks directly to what was not brought to us as a result of that strategic direction from our last term of council. We never did look at open budgeting as a result of that strategic direction. This motion spells it out, and it moves us, it gets it out there. We've heard that from the CAO that they're fine to look at this. So to me, it continues the work that we did last term on open government, specifically open budgeting, and it even mentions further options down the road, like participatory budgeting, which I agree with Deputy Mayor Chappelle, it is confusing to have it in the whereas clauses, but not in the be it resolved, because we're not looking at participatory budgeting for this budget year. However, I'm satisfied that, as Councillor Hutchison said, it's not spelled out in the whereas clauses how it fits in with open budgeting. I guess it's assumed that if you know anything about open budgeting, you know how participatory budgeting fits in. So this is actually a subset itself of open government, open budgeting, and then participatory budgeting is a further subset of that. And as you can see, so just to remind everyone, what we're doing is by opening it up and making it transparent, by making the decisions around money transparent, by engaging the public as participatory budgeting would do, it's all moving, as the presenter said earlier, us towards enriching our democracy. So democracy thrives on engagement, thrives on people being involved in the decisions that affect them. So it's all part of that, and it is a continuum, and it is a direction that you go. So we started in that direction last term. This takes us closer to in that transparency, open government direction, and I'm fully in support. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Neal.
Yes, I totally support this motion, and I'm glad that we've left in some reference to Ontario cities that have indeed engaged in this process, because I would hope that our staff, as they review and how they choose to implement this, would look for best practices in other communities, whether we ask them to or not. That would be an expectation, I believe. I really like the comments of the previous speaker. I think we went well on our way to transparency and open governance in the last term of council, and this, I agree, is a continuation of that effort, and to engage the public, to engage the community in our budget process, I think will help us do our job, but it'll also help the community to understand what budget priorities have happened and to give them an opportunity to weigh in on it. So I'm quite happy to move to support this. See, it wasn't just me. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Sanik.
Thank you, Your Worship. I support this motion. I just want to also add that the City of Burlington also has an open budget process. It's called Get Involved Burlington, talking about the budget. So if staff also want to look at Burlington, they have a website about their 2019 budget that was open process.
Okay. Deputy Mayor Chappelle, will you take the chair?
I do and recognize you.
Thank you. So I actually certainly support what this motion is guiding us towards. I think that there's great value in it. I think I just wanted to respond to a couple of the earlier comments that are referring back to priorities from the last term of council. And I think we do have to be careful because we have a different set of priorities for this council than we did for the last one. Some of them are the same, some of them have changed. On our agenda tonight, there was a report from staff on our strategic plan update that made reference to the number of new motions that we continue to bring forward. And that ultimately there is a certain amount of capacity and that we're not going to be able to do all of our priorities from this term of council and all of the priorities from the previous council and the time before. So we are eventually going to have to make choices. So I appreciate this. I think that this is really good, but I will ask the question, because I've committed to continue to do this. Is this something that staff can take on that will this cause us to have to give up anything else in our strategic plan moving forward this year?
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor. So the answer is no, it's not going to have an impact because it's something that we were already contemplating doing. So we had actually started to research a number of communities. Some of them are listed in the motion, some are not. So we had already started to collect that information to look at how we could improve our process next year.
Okay. Thank you very much. Mr. Clerk, can I see you for a moment? Okay, folks, so we will reconvene. So thank you for your patience. I think I actually had given the chair away, so thank you, Deputy Mayor, for giving it back to me. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Is there anybody else that wishes to speak to new motion number 2? Councillor Kiley.
Thank you, Mayor Patterson, and through you, I just want to say congratulations to the movers. I think it's very exciting. It is the trajectory that Councillor Stroud talked about, but increased engagement, and it's a great move towards ultimately what I hope will be participatory budgeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Doherty, you have the last word.
Thank you, and through you, Your Worship. I recognize that we have introduced a lot of motions, which is true, but this is why I checked with staff before I submitted this one, and I was relieved to hear that staff have already started to look into open budgets. This is probably not surprising because more and more cities are embracing open budgets, and I just hope that my fellow councillors will support me in this. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. So we will call the vote on new motion number 2. And that carries.